He used a captured enemy rifle. No one expected him to take down 33 Nazi snipers in just 7 days. December 9th, 1944. The eastern edge of the Hurtgen Forest was quiet except for the occasional distant artillery thump. Snow clung to the broken fences and collapsed rooftops around the American positions. Visibility was low. The forest in front of them held layers of fog that made depth hard to judge and movement nearly impossible to track. The 112th Infantry Regiment had been ordered to push through this terrain to secure a series of crossroads the Germans were using to move supplies. Their progress had slowed to almost nothing because of enemy snipers positioned across the ridgeline. Private First Class Michael Rowan, 23 years old, moved with the 2nd Squad of his platoon. He had joined the Army in 1942 after working on his family's farm in Iowa. He was known as quiet, steady, and observant. Rowan was not a specialist, nor a sniper. His job was simple: advance with the platoon, maintain his rifle, and follow orders. Over the previous weeks, however, the platoon had lost several men to German marksmen. The snipers shot from concealed positions, often firing a single round before disappearing into new cover. Rowan had watched experienced soldiers freeze the moment a bullet struck near them. The platoon had no reliable method for locating the shooters. That morning, after a short movement across a frozen field, Rowan stopped beside a ditch. A patrol had passed through the area the night before and had killed a German sniper in a close-range fight. His rifle had been left in the mud. Rowan crouched and studied it carefully. It was a Carabiner 98K with a ZF-39 scope attached. The rifle was built for long-distance precision. The optic had a narrow field but clear magnification, far better than anything on Rowan's standard M1 Garand. Corporal Thomas Bennett, 26, stood nearby. He had been with Rowan since basic training. Bennett was more outspoken, often used humor to deal with stress, and had taken on an informal role of keeping the squad's morale up. When he saw Rowan holding the captured rifle, he frowned. "Why are you picking that up?" he asked. "Nobody wants that thing. Leave it." Rowan didn't answer right away. He checked the bolt, the condition of the scope, and the stock. Everything on the weapon suggested it had been used recently and maintained well. The Germans had been out shooting the Americans because of rifles like this. Lieutenant Harris, 29, approached the squad. He had served in North Africa before being transferred to Europe. He understood the difficulty of moving infantry through terrain controlled by disciplined snipers. He kept his voice low. "We move in 5 minutes," he said. "Positions remain the same. Watch the upper windows and the tree line." Rowan finally spoke. "Sir, the sniper's hitting us. They're using this rifle. If I use it too, I might be able to see them before they fire." Harris studied him. Rowan had always been calm under pressure, but this request was unusual. The lieutenant knew the risks. German weapons could expose a soldier's position. The sound of the shot, the muzzle flash, and even the silhouette could be mistaken in the chaos of combat. "You understand you'll be responsible if that gets you mistaken for the enemy," Harris said. "Yes, sir." Harris nodded once. "Your decision. Just stay coordinated with the squad." Rowan slung the rifle over his shoulder. The men around him exchanged looks. Some thought Rowan was taking an unnecessary risk. Some thought he was desperate to slow the sniper attacks. No one believed it would make a difference. The platoon began moving toward the next set of ruined farmhouses. Their task was to secure the structures, identify sniper positions, and mark safe lane for the rest of the regiment. Rowan walked near the center of the formation, scanning rooftops and windows through the German optic. The rifle felt unfamiliar, with a different balance and recoil system than the American M1. But its clarity made distant details stand out in a way he had never experienced. As they advanced, the first sniper shot of the day rang out. A bullet struck a stone wall near Private Delaney's head. Rowan immediately dropped behind cover on a search for the source. He studied angles, shadows, and shapes. He thought about where he would hide if he were the shooter. He looked at high windows, dark corners, elevated positions with narrow firing lanes. This was the moment Rowan understood why he had picked up the rifle. For weeks, the platoon had reacted to snipers. Rowan wanted to act before the sniper fired. He wasn't trying to become a marksman. He was trying to keep the squad from losing more men. His job had changed, not because the army had reassigned him, but because the battlefield forced him to adapt. The rest of the squad waited for orders. Bennett crouched behind a broken tractor and looked over at Rowan with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "You really think that thing's going to help?" he asked. Rowan didn't take his eye off the scope. "I don't know yet." What he did know was that their current methods weren't working. The German sharpshooters were too skilled, too patient, and too well-equipped. Rowan believed the only way to counter them was to understand them, how they aimed, how they positioned themselves, and how they controlled the battlefield from hidden spaces. As the platoon prepared to move again, Rowan adjusted the sling on the captured rifle and settled into a new position. He had made a decision that no one expected. Not the squad, not the lieutenant, not even himself. This was the beginning of 7 days that would redefine what he was capable of and how the men around him viewed him. But in that moment, all he cared about was the next shot fired by the unseen hunter in the mist, and whether he could finally see it coming. The next morning began with a thick layer of low clouds hanging over the ruined farming village ahead of the American line. The air was cold enough that each breath rose in a visible stream. The platoon moved carefully between stone walls, broken wagons, and collapsed barns. Their orders were to advance through the village, clear the buildings, and locate the sniper positions that had halted progress the previous day. Every man kept his head low. They had learned that the first bullet always came without warning. Private Rowan moved near the front of the squad, the captured German rifle secured tightly against his shoulder as he scanned the rooftops through the optic. The village looked empty, but the men knew that meant nothing. German marksmen had been using these destroyed farm towns as natural fortifications. High windows, shadowed rooms, and tight alleys provided countless hiding places. The silence broke with a sharp crack. A round struck the ground near Private Delaney, sending dirt and ice outward. The platoon dropped instantly. Lieutenant Harris raised his hand, signaling them to hold positions. Rowan flattened himself against a stone trough and lifted the scope again. He adjusted the focus. The glass brought distant detail into sharp clarity: shattered tiles, empty frames, a sagging roofline. Rowan moved slowly, studying angles, searching for any sign of a shooter. The German sniper had fired twice yesterday from an elevated position, which gave Rowan a starting point. Snipers preferred height when they could get it. He spotted something after several slow seconds of scanning. On the second floor of a damaged farmhouse about 300 meters away, the remains of a curtain hung crookedly. Behind it, Rowan noticed a straight dark line, a rifle barrel resting on a window frame. It was nearly invisible to the naked eye. Rowan exhaled, steadied the rifle, corrected for distance, and squeezed the trigger. The sound was sharper than the M1 Garand's familiar report, but the recoil was predictable. The German rifle fired with a sudden, controlled force. A small, quick movement appeared inside the window, just a shift of the curtain, and then nothing. Bennett looked over. "Tell me you hit that." Rowan didn't answer immediately. He kept staring through the scope. There was no counter shot, no movement, no shift in the barrel. The window remained still. After the platoon secured the area and moved toward the farmhouse, Rowan followed quietly. Inside, they found the German sniper lying on the floor beside his weapon. His position was exactly where Rowan had seen it. The sniper had maps pinned to the wall behind him, each marking likely firing lanes aimed toward the American approach routes. Lieutenant Harris studied the scene. He was prepared, he said. He had us mapped out. Bennett looked at Rowan. "That's one for you." Rowan didn't respond. His attention was on the room, layout, angles, terrain, anything that explained how the sniper had chosen his position. He walked to the window and looked out. From here, the village lanes formed clear straight lines. Anyone moving across them would have been exposed for several seconds. The sniper had taken advantage of simple geometry and elevation. The platoon moved on, continuing to clear structures. Rowan remained alert. He understood that most German sniper teams worked in pairs or small groups. One took the shot while the other observed or searched for new targets. There was no guarantee that the shooter he had eliminated was alone. Another quiet hour passed before they reached the far edge of the village. The squad stacked along a wall near a barn with a partially collapsed roof. Rowan checked the corners, ran his scope across the upper beams, and advanced. Inside, they found tracks, boot prints in the straw, disturbed debris, and a firing hole carved into one of the planks. A second sniper had been stationed there earlier. He had either retreated or relocated. Rowan handed the rifle to Harris for inspection. The lieutenant held it briefly, then returned it. "You understand this better than any of us," Harris said. "Keep using it." The squad gathered near a battered courtyard. Snow drifted from broken tiles above. No one joked about Rowan's weapon anymore. They had seen its value. Rowan kept scanning the ridgeline while the others rested. The German optic allowed him to search the upper slopes clearly, and it was now obvious that this was the only way to locate snipers before they struck. Bennett walked over and crouched beside him. "You really think you can see what they see?" Rowan kept his eye to the glass. "I can see how they think." "That's enough." The platoon waited for orders to advance deeper into the forest ahead. For now, they had silenced the marksman who controlled the village. It was only one shooter, but it changed the rhythm of the platoon. They could move again. They could breathe again. Rowan tightened the sling of the captured rifle. This was only the beginning. He knew there were more German snipers in the area, trained, patient, and skilled. But he also knew something had shifted. For the first time, he could fight them on equal terms. This was the first step in what would become a long, exhausting, and dangerous pursuit. One that would test every skill he had and force him to understand an enemy even before he saw them. 2 days later, the regiment pushed into the outskirts of Kleinbruck, a small town that had been hit repeatedly by artillery. Most buildings were damaged. Roofs sagged under the weight of snow. Streets were filled with broken bricks, shattered glass, and overturned carts. The town offered cover, but it also offered elevated positions for German snipers. The platoon advanced in a wedge formation, moving slowly and checking every corner. Rowan stayed near the middle of the formation, scanning with the German scope. The narrow streets created confined angles, and each intersection felt like a possible trap. The Germans had fought hard for the Hurtgen region. They knew the ground and used every structure to slow the American advance. A rifle shot cracked sharply through the morning air. A sergeant from another squad collapsed near an intersection before anyone understood where the shot had come from. The platoon pulled back behind a row of low walls and waited. Lieutenant Harris raised his hand, signaling for silence. Rowan moved into an abandoned bakery that still smelled faintly of burnt flour. The interior was dark and cold. Part of the ceiling had collapsed, leaving a slanted path to the roof. Rowan climbed carefully, testing every step. The wood creaked but held. When he reached the top, he dropped to his stomach and crawled forward until he had a clear view of the town square below. He raised the German rifle and steadied the scope. The optics revealed details he couldn't see with his eyes. Chips in windows, scratch marks on gutters, slight movements behind torn curtains. Rowan swept the scope in slow arcs over the buildings facing the square. He stopped when he noticed a brief flash, just a small reflection from a second-story window of a building across the street. It wasn't sunlight. The sky was too overcast for that. It looked like light bouncing off glass. Rowan shifted slightly left and watched the position. Something inside the room moved. A shoulder, the top of a helmet, a scope. He adjusted for distance, timed his breathing, and fired. The window shattered inward. The shape inside the room fell out of sight. The town fell silent again for several seconds. Then another shot came, this one from a different direction. The bullet hit the rooftop only a few inches from Rowan's arm. He rolled back behind a chimney and listened for the follow-up shot that never came. The second sniper had missed, and now he was waiting. Rowan crawled to the opposite side of the roof. From this angle, he could see alleys and roofs that were hidden from the square. He scanned quickly but carefully. He focused on elevated positions that had a clear line of sight to his previous location. On a rooftop 2 buildings away, he saw a dark shape behind a pile of broken tiles. It was a German helmet, barely visible above the cover. The sniper had created a small firing position by stacking the debris into a stable rest. Rowan steadied the rifle. The Germans trained their marksmen to wait for targets to reappear. Rowan used that expectation against him. He aimed at the base of the helmet and waited. When the sniper shifted his rifle a few centimeters to adjust his aim, Rowan fired. The helmet dropped instantly. Rowan stayed prone, checking for more movement. He didn't climb down until the platoon reached the building and secured it. When Rowan rejoined his squad, Bennett stepped forward. His expression had none of the joking confidence he usually carried. He looked at Rowan with a serious, almost confused respect. "How many now?" he asked. "5," Rowan said. The squad absorbed the number quietly. There was no celebration. There was no cheering. The men understood what these kills meant. Each one removed a marksman who had been halting entire units. Each one meant fewer wounded, fewer dead. As they advanced deeper into Kleinbruck, Rowan continued scanning the rooftops. The captured German rifle had changed the rhythm of how he operated. He wasn't just reacting to sniper shots anymore. He was predicting them, reading positions, angles, and signs of activity the way the German shooters did. The squad moved through another row of buildings. The town was still dangerous, but something had shifted. Rowan's precision gave the platoon a level of control they hadn't experienced since entering the forest. The men followed him with a confidence that hadn't existed days earlier. By the time the regiment secured the central crossroads, word of Rowan's actions had spread beyond the squad. The officers now recognized that his ability to counter the enemy snipers was directly affecting the pace of their advance. Rowan didn't think of any of this. He was focused only on the next position, the next angle, the next elevated window where a rifle might be waiting. He didn't see himself as anything special. He saw a job the platoon needed done, spotting and eliminating shooters before they fired another round. The day in Kleinbruck ended with the snow falling again, covering new rubble on top of old ruins. The platoon gathered inside a half-collapsed stable to rest. Rowan sat near the entrance, cleaning the captured rifle quietly. Bennett watched him for a moment, shook his head slightly, and finally said, "Whatever you're seeing out there, keep doing it." Rowan tightened a screw on the rifle's bolt assembly and nodded. He was learning more about how these snipers worked, and he knew there were many more ahead. This was only the third day. On the fourth day, the regiment left Kleinbruck behind and moved back into the forest. The trees were thin and tall, their branches weighed down by ice. The ground was uneven, with pockets of snow, exposed roots, and patches of frozen mud that cracked under every step. Visibility was limited. The fog drifted between the trees in slow sheets, changing the appearance of the terrain every few minutes. This environment favored the German snipers. They knew the forest well and used natural cover instead of structures. For the Americans, every ridge and cluster of trees carried the risk of a concealed shooter. Rowan walked near the left flank of the platoon, his rifle raised and ready. He scanned the forest through the German scope, searching for any unnatural shapes or changes in the environment. He had learned enough by now to identify the signs of a sniper hide: disturbed soil, a broken branch, a patch of snow melted from body heat. Anything that suggested someone had been in a position for a long period. The platoon reached a gradual slope leading toward a ridge. Lieutenant Harris ordered them to spread out and advance slowly. The higher ground ahead controlled the entire area. If the Germans had placed snipers anywhere, it would be there. A few minutes into the ascent, a shot broke the silence. A bullet tore past Rowan's head and struck a tree behind him, sending bark fragments across the ground. Everyone dropped immediately. Rowan crawled behind a thick stump and kept his breathing steady. The shot had been rushed. That detail mattered. A disciplined sniper fired only when fully confident in a clean shot. This one had reacted quickly to movement, which meant he felt threatened or was trying to regain control of the terrain. Rowan angled the rifle upward and scanned the slope. The fog moved in thick lines between the trees, creating short glimpses of clarity followed by complete obstruction. Rowan used the brief clear windows to check each tree line, each hollow, each section of exposed root. He noticed a shape near the base of a large pine tree, slight but present. The snow was disturbed in a way that didn't match the pattern around it. Rowan studied the angle. The sniper was positioned in the hollow created by a fallen root system, giving him a narrow but protected firing lane downward toward the platoon. Rowan shifted several meters to the right, keeping low, using fallen branches for cover. Once he reached a better angle, the firing lane became clear. A faint section of rifle sight protruded from the root pocket. Rowan steadied his aim and fired. The figure inside the hollow collapsed against the roots. He didn't move from his position. He knew enough by now to assume the presence of a second sniper. Pairs often worked together in the forest. One shot while the other watched for counterfire. The forest became completely silent. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. Rowan adjusted his angle again, crawling toward thicker brush. He kept the scope at eye level and scanned for any sign of the observer sniper, movement, a reflection, or the outline of a helmet. He saw it after nearly a minute of searching. Behind a rotting log, there was a faint curve that didn't match the shape of the wood. A helmet. The sniper was waiting for Rowan to stand up from his previous firing position. Rowan flattened his body against the snow and aimed. The wood of the log was soft from decay. He could penetrate it easily at this distance. He fired once. The log shook slightly. No return shot followed. The platoon advanced again after receiving Harris's signal. They found the first sniper in the hollow, well-equipped, dressed in camouflage smocks, his rifle set into a precise firing wedge. The second sniper lay behind the decayed log, a clean entry wound visible where Rowan's shot had passed through. Bennett approached Rowan, breathing hard from the climb. "That makes 7, doesn't it?" Rowan nodded. He wasn't counting them as victories. He counted them because each one reduced the number of men who could shoot at his platoon from hiding. The squad continued up the ridge. Rowan checked each newly gained position before the men moved forward. He studied the ground with the same attention he used on rooftops and windows earlier in the week. The forest taught him new details about how the German marksmen operated. Here, they used natural depressions instead of buildings. They relied on angles created by roots and rocks rather than brick and timber. They chose places where retreat paths existed behind the hill. Rowan understood these choices because he had been thinking like them for days. When the ridge was secure, Lieutenant Harris called a short halt. The men gathered behind fallen logs and tree trunks. Their breath created long trails of fog. Their faces showed the strain of constant alertness. Rowan sat near them, his back against a tree. He checked the German rifle for moisture and clean snow from the scope mount. Harris approached him quietly. "Good work today," he said. "You spotted them before they could fire again. The whole ridge could have been locked down." Rowan didn't look at him. He kept his focus on the rifle. "They were positioned well," he said. "Someone trained them to pick the best angles." Harris nodded. "That's why we needed you up front." The lieutenant walked away to brief the other squads. Rowan stayed where he was, the forest surrounding him in a cold, heavy stillness. He knew the next days would be harder. The German units ahead had more experienced marksmen. The terrain would get worse, the weather colder, but he had a tool that gave him a clear advantage. More importantly, he understood the logic behind each position the sniper selected. The ridge was only one piece of ground in a long line of contested territory, but securing it meant the regiment could move again. And each time Rowan acted before a sniper did, the platoon advanced without another casualty. As the light began to fade and the men prepared to move toward their next objective, Rowan tightened the sling on the captured rifle and stood. His role in the platoon was no longer just as a rifleman. He had become the one who located the threats before they appeared. And in the forest, that role was the difference between moving forward and staying pinned under unseen fire. On the morning of December 16th, the town ahead of the regiment was quiet. The snow had fallen heavily through the night, and the roofs, windowsills, and debris piles were covered in a thick layer of white. The streets looked empty, but the men knew this appearance was deceptive. Reports from scouts indicated that multiple German snipers had repositioned themselves outside the town during the night. Their purpose was clear: halt the American advance long enough for German reinforcements to reorganize deeper in the sector. Rowan walked beside Bennett as the platoon approached the first row of damaged buildings. The temperature was low enough that the metal on Rowan's captured rifle felt like ice. He checked the bolt action to make sure it still cycled smoothly. He knew that condensation and cold weather could change how the rifle behaved. He cleaned the scope lens with a cloth and adjusted the sling across his chest. Lieutenant Harris briefed them quickly. Secure the buildings, identify sniper positions, and advance toward the central square. Their movement had to be controlled and deliberate. In towns like this, a single concealed shooter could lock down an entire company. The platoon advanced into a narrow street. The wind carried loose snow across the ground in short bursts. Rowan scanned the upper floors before moving under each broken archway. He kept the optic raised and swept every rooftop, chimney, and attic window. German snipers favored elevated positions with large, open firing sectors. They reached an old inn at the far side of the street. The building had taken heavy damage. The top floor was partially open to the sky, with exposed rafters and collapsed beams. Harris ordered the squad to clear it. Rowan moved inside first, stepping over fallen plaster and destroyed furniture. The floorboards creaked under his weight. He found a staircase with half the steps broken and climbed carefully until he reached the upper level. He lay flat behind a partially intact wall and looked out over the town. From this height, he could see several key firing lanes, roads leading toward the square, the tops of barns, and the slanted roofs of nearby houses. It was an ideal observation point. He checked the closest structures first. Nothing. Then he scanned the outskirts. A barn with a hayloft door slightly open caught his attention. The snow around the opening was disturbed in a pattern that didn't match the natural wind direction. Rowan focused the scope. Inside the dark opening, he finally saw the edge of a rifle barrel. He adjusted windage and fired. The round struck inside the loft. The barrel disappeared instantly. Rowan immediately relocated to a different section of the ruined floor. A second sniper would expect him to remain in the same position. When he peered over the edge, he saw a figure shift on a metal walkway attached to a water tower. The shape was small, but distinct shoulder helmet rifle. He fired again. The figure collapsed sideways and fell partly out of sight. A moment later, a bullet slammed into the wooden beam just inches from Rowan's face. Splinters cut into his cheek. He pulled back quickly and slid across the floor to the lower part of the room, taking cover behind a fallen dresser. He breathed steadily, keeping his grip firm on the rifle. The shot had come from a rooftop 2 buildings away. The angle was consistent with the direction of the impact. Rowan crawled along the floor, staying low, adjusting the rifle to keep the optic protected from debris. He approached a gap in the wall that allowed him to view the secondary rooftop. He raised the scope and scanned slowly. After a few seconds, he saw the sniper, lying behind a row of chimney bricks, barrel aimed directly at Rowan's previous position. Rowan fired twice. The first shot struck the bricks. The second aimed a few inches lower, accounting for where the sniper's upper body would be. The rifle on the rooftop moved abruptly and then fell still. For the next hour, Rowan changed firing positions repeatedly. He shifted from the top floor to the hallway, then to a crawl space near the stairwell. Each time he took a shot, he relocated. The Germans were attempting to triangulate his location, but the unfamiliar sound of the captured rifle misled them. They could not be sure whether one of their own was firing or whether an American was using a German weapon. Rowan hit another sniper who was concealed behind a collapsed roof beam, then another who had positioned himself inside a church bell tower. Each sighting required patience and precision. Snowfall made long shots difficult. Wind carried the cold through every gap in the walls, making it harder to stay steady. By midday, the volume of incoming fire had decreased significantly. The platoon advanced through the streets with fewer interruptions. When they entered the building below Rowan's position, Bennett climbed the stairs and found him sitting against a wall, breathing slowly. His cheek was scratched from splinters. The rifle rested across his knees. Bennett stood there quietly for a few seconds before asking, "How many?" Rowan wiped his cheek with a gloved hand, smearing away a thin line of dried blood. 33. Bennett stared at him, unable to find the right words. "You do realize," he finally said, that you just clear the entire sector. Rowan didn't respond. He wasn't thinking about the number. He was thinking about the methods the snipers had used, their angles, their fallback routes, the structure choices they made. He had spent 7 days learning how they thought, how they moved, and how they controlled the terrain. He understood that each engagement required more than simply spotting a target. It required anticipating the decisions of someone trained to remain unseen. Rowan stood, slung the captured rifle, and followed the squad out into the cold air. Snow continued to fall across the ruined rooftops. The sounds of distant artillery echoed far beyond the town. The immediate threat was gone, but Rowan knew he would face more snipers as the regiment pushed deeper into German territory. For now, though, the company could move. They were no longer pinned down. The men on the line had space to breathe again. Rowan didn't feel triumphant. He felt focused. He had done his job for the day, just as he had every day before. The only difference was that now the platoon understood exactly how much that mattered. That evening, the regiment established a temporary camp on the outskirts of the town. The snowfall had slowed, but the cold remained sharp and constant. The men set up small fires inside helmets and dug shallow windbreaks along the tree line. The atmosphere was quiet. Some soldiers cleaned their weapons. Others sat in small groups, speaking in low voices about the events of the day. The tension that had followed them through the forest and the ruined streets had eased, replaced by a subdued sense of relief. Rowan sat alone near a supply crate, the captured German rifle resting across his lap. He wiped down the metal parts with a cloth to remove any moisture. His movements were slow and deliberate. The scratches on his cheek from the earlier firefight were visible but not serious. He checked the scope twice to ensure no snow had seeped inside the housing. Lieutenant Harris approached and stopped a few steps away. He kept his hands in the pockets of his overcoat as he looked down at Rowan. "You could have pulled back from the front line at any point," he said. "Most men do when the snipers start targeting them." Rowan continued wiping the rifle. "It didn't feel right," he said. "They were hitting us every day. We didn't have any way to see them." Harris nodded. "You changed that. The company needed someone who could read those positions. You ended up being that person." Rowan didn't respond. He placed the rifle beside him and folded the cloth neatly. The forest and the town had shown him different methods the German marksmen used. Each environment changed their tactics. Each demanded a different kind of approach. Rowan had adapted because the platoon needed someone who could take that responsibility. Bennett joined them, settling onto a crate nearby. He looked tired but alert. "The guys were talking," he said quietly. "They know what you did this week. 33 is a lot." Rowan shook his head once. They were trained. They were dangerous. They would have kept shooting. Bennett didn't argue. He understood Rowan wasn't treating the kills as accomplishments. Rowan viewed them as tasks, steps taken to clear ground so the platoon could move forward. Harris spoke again. "We'll be pushing deeper tomorrow. The terrain ahead is different. Open fields, some tree lines, not as many rooftops or ridges. But there will still be snipers. There always are. If you're willing to stay in the same role, we'll rely on you." Rowan nodded. He didn't consider stepping back. He had learned too much about how the snipers operated to return to his original routine. The captured rifle gave him range and clarity they otherwise lacked. It had become a tool for survival, not just for him, but for the entire platoon. As the night grew colder, most of the men settled into their tents or dugouts. Rowan remained seated near the supply crate, watching the dark tree line. He could still picture the positions he had encountered: the hayloft, the water tower walkway, the rooftop chimney, the forest hollow. Each one showed him something about the shooters who used them. He didn't view them as faceless enemies. He understood that they were soldiers carrying out their orders, just as he was. They chose their angles carefully. They waited patiently. They worked alone or in pairs. Rowan knew that if he had been on the opposite side, he might have chosen similar positions. Bennett broke the silence. "When this is over," he said, "are you going to keep that rifle?" Rowan looked at it for a long moment before answering. "No, it's not mine. I'm just using it because we need it." Bennett nodded slowly. "Makes sense." Rowan stood up, slung the rifle over his shoulder, and looked across the camp. The fires glowed faintly, scattered between rows of tents and foxholes. Medics moved quietly from position to position. The cold air carried every sound clearly: the crunch of boots, the clink of metal tools, the low murmur of soldiers trying to rest. The narrator's voice closes the scene. Rowan had not set out to be a specialist. He was an infantryman who adapted when circumstances demanded it. The captured rifle gave him the ability to see the battlefield differently, and that difference allowed dozens of men to move forward without being pinned down by unseen shooters. His choices were not driven by pride or desire for recognition. They were driven by a simple, practical fact. The platoon needed someone who could understand the threat and act before it took more lives. He would not keep the rifle when the war ended. He would not talk much about those 7 days later in life. But the men who marched beside him never forgot what he did. Not because of the number of snipers he eliminated, but because he understood the importance of seeing the terrain from the enemy's perspective and using that understanding to protect the people around him. In the cold stillness of the Hurtgen front, Rowan took his place beside the platoon's small fire. He wasn't looking for recognition. He wasn't looking for validation. He was preparing for the next day, the next ridge, the next hidden rifle pointed in their direction. For now, the camp was quiet, but the war was still ahead of them, and Rowan knew his role was far from finished.